Tejo carried his son's lifeless body through the village streets as darkness fell around them. The Vorthan soldiers had taken over the community center and were drinking some kind of alien alcohol that glowed purple in their metal cups. They laughed loudly and made jokes about how easy it had been to conquer the weak human settlement. Commander Bex boasted that his warriors could take 100 worlds like this one without breaking a sweat. The other villagers watched Tejo from their windows, but none of them dared to come outside. Something about the way he moved made them nervous. His steps were too quiet, and his eyes swept back and forth, like he was studying everything around him. This was not the same man who had helped them fix their broken farming equipment just yesterday morning. Behind his house, Tejo found the old oak tree where Wujin used to climb and play. The boy had built a small fort in its branches using wooden boards and rope. His father had helped him nail the pieces together on sunny weekend afternoons. Now those happy memories felt like they belonged to someone else entirely. Began digging a grave in the soft earth beneath the tree. The work was hard, but he did not stop to rest. His hands moved steadily, even as tears fell from his eyes onto the growing pile of dirt. Somewhere in the distance he could hear the alien soldiers singing war songs in their harsh language. The sound made his jaw clench tighter with each passing minute. When the grave was deep enough, Tejo gently placed his son in the earth. He wrapped the small body in Wujin's favorite blanket, the blue one with pictures of spaceships that his mother had made before she died. The boy had always dreamed of traveling to the stars like the heroes in his picture books. Now he would never get that chance. As he covered the grave with dirt, Tejo spoke quietly to his son. He promised that the aliens who did this would pay for their crime. He swore that none of them would leave New Terra alive. His voice was calm and steady, but there was something underneath it that would have terrified anyone who heard it. The gentle farmer was disappearing, and something much more dangerous was taking his place. After placing a simple wooden marker on the grave, Tejo walked back to his house. The village was quiet now, except for the sounds coming from the community center where the Vorthan soldiers continued their celebration. They had no idea that they had just made the worst mistake of their lives. In his basement, Tejo moved aside boxes of old farming equipment and canned vegetables until he reached the back wall. It looked like ordinary concrete, but when he pressed a hidden switch, part of it swung inward like a door. Behind the false wall was a small room that none of his neighbors knew existed. The secret room contained things that had no place in a peaceful farming village. Military weapons hung on racks along the walls. Advanced body armor sat on display stands. Electronic equipment blinked with status lights that cast strange shadows in the darkness. At the center of it all was a metal case that Tejo had not opened in 3 years. Inside the case were items that told the real story of who Kim Tejo actually was. Medals from battles fought in distant star systems, commendations signed by admirals whose names were classified, photographs of him with other soldiers in places that officially did not exist, and at the bottom of the case was a patch showing an anchor eagle and trident, the symbol of Earth's most elite fighting force. Tejo was not just any retired soldier, he was Shadow 7, one of only 12 men who had ever earned that designation in the Navy SEALs. The number meant he had completed missions so dangerous and important that most of them were still classified even now. He had fought in wars that the general public never heard about, on worlds whose names appeared on no official maps. The Proxima War had lasted 2 years and claimed millions of lives. Tejo had spent most of that time behind enemy lines, gathering intelligence and eliminating high-value targets. His team had destroyed 3 enemy command centers and assassinated 7 rebel leaders. The war ended 6 months earlier than military planners expected. Thanks to their efforts during the Kepler Rebellion, he had infiltrated the rebel stronghold on Kepler. Primed by disguising himself as a mining engineer, it took him 4 months to work his way into their inner circle. Once he had their trust, he systematically sabotaged their weapons factories and communication networks. The rebellion collapsed within weeks. There were other missions, 2 operations that required skills most people could not. Imagine Tejo could kill silently with his bare hands or eliminate targets from over a mile away with a precision rifle. He spoke 6 alien languages fluently and could blend into almost any environment. He was trained to survive in hostile territory. For months, with minimal supplies, the Earth Military had quietly placed several retired special forces operators on frontier colonies like New Terra. They were meant to live normal lives as farmers and shopkeepers while keeping watch for potential threats. Most of them hoped they would never need to use their old skills again. Tejo had been one of those men until today. He selected weapons and equipment carefully from his hidden arsenal, a combat knife that could cut through Vorthan scales like butter, explosive charges small enough to hide but powerful enough to destroy alien armor, electronic devices that could jam communications and disable security systems. Everything he chose was designed to be used by one man operating alone against superior numbers. The tactical armor felt strange after 3 years of wearing simple farming clothes, but his body remembered how to move in it. The helmet contained night vision equipment and a heads-up display that could track multiple targets at once. The armor itself was made from materials that could stop most energy weapons while remaining flexible enough for stealth operations. As he prepared his equipment, Tahoe thought about his son and the peaceful life they had built together on New Terra. Wu Jin had never known about his father's past or the terrible things he had done in the name of protecting humanity. The boy had grown up believing his father was just a quiet farmer who grew vegetables and helped his neighbors. Now that innocent child was dead, killed by aliens who thought humans were weak and helpless. They had no idea that they were about to face one of the most dangerous warriors humanity had ever produced. Shadow 7 had been retired for 3 years, but he was about to come out of retirement with a vengeance. Idaho checked his weapons one final time and reviewed the intelligence he had gathered during the day. He knew exactly how many Vorthan soldiers were in the village where they were positioned and what kind of weapons they carried. He had studied their patrol routes and identified their weak points. All that remained was to begin the hunt. The aliens in the community center were still celebrating their easy victory. They had no guards posted, and their weapons were stacked carelessly in the corner. They believed the humans were too frightened and helpless to pose any threat. It was exactly the kind of overconfidence that got soldiers killed in Warze's midnight approach. Tejo made his final preparations. He painted his face with black camouflage that would make him nearly invisible in the darkness. He activated the stealth systems in his armor that would muffle his footsteps and mask his heat signature. He was no longer Kim Tejo, the peaceful farmer. He was Shadow 7, and he was going to war. The last thing he did before leaving his house was to visit his son's grave one more time. He knelt beside the small wooden marker and spoke quietly to the boy who would never grow up. He promised again that justice would be done and that the aliens would pay for what they had taken from him. When he stood up and walked away from the grave, Tejo left behind the last traces of the man he had been for 3 years. What emerged from the darkness was something the Vorthan Empire had never encountered before: a human warrior with nothing left to lose and all the skills needed to make his enemies suffer for their crimes. The hunt was about to begin, and Commander Bex and his soldiers had no idea what was coming for them in the night. The first Vorthan soldier died at 3 in the morning, without making a sound. Private Zek had been assigned to guard the northern edge of the village where the road led up into the hills. He was young for a Vorthan warrior, and this was his first mission away from the homeworld. The night air was cool and quiet, and he was fighting to stay awake when death came for him. Tejo moved through the darkness like a shadow that had learned to walk. He had studied the aliens' patrol patterns for hours and knew exactly when and where each guard would be alone. The thermal imaging in his helmet showed him Zek's position long before the alien could detect his approach. The combat knife that had served Shadow 7 through a dozen covert missions slid between the scales on the alien's neck with practiced precision. Zek had time for one surprised gasp before his body went limp. Tejo caught the falling corpse and dragged it into the tall grass beside the road where it would not be found. Until morning, he took the dead soldier's energy weapon and studied it carefully. The design was similar to weapons used by other alien races he had fought during his military career. Within minutes, he understood how to operate it and how to disable its tracking systems that would alert other Vorthans if it was used. The weapon disappeared into his equipment pack along with the soldier's ammunition. By dawn, the first patrol had discovered Zek's missing post, but there was no sign of the guard himself. Commander Bex ordered a search of the area around the village perimeter. His soldiers spread out in pairs looking for any trace of their missing comrade. They found boot prints in the soft earth, but the trail led nowhere useful. The second death came during the morning shift. Change Sergeant Korth was walking from the supply depot to the communications center when he simply vanished between the two buildings. One moment he was there, and the next he was gone. His replacement waited at the comm center for 20 minutes before reporting that Korth had never arrived. This time the searchers found the missing soldier's energy weapon hanging from a branch of the old oak tree behind Tehosia House, but there was no sign of Sergeant Korth himself and no clues about what had happened to him. Commander Bex began to suspect that something more dangerous than frightened farmers was stalking his troops. Teho had spent years learning to use every advantage that terrain and preparation could provide. The village that looked so simple and peaceful to the Vorthan invaders was actually a complex battlefield for someone who knew how to see it properly. Underground tunnels connected the basements of the larger buildings, allowing him to move unseen beneath the aliens' feet. The old storm drainage system provided another network of hidden passages that ran under the main streets. Ventilation shafts in the community center and school building gave him access to places the aliens thought were secure. Water pipes and electrical conduits created pathways through walls that appeared solid to casual observation. Every building in Harmony Village had been constructed by humans who understood that frontier colonies sometimes faced unexpected threats. The basements were deeper than they appeared, and many had hidden rooms for storing emergency supplies. The walls were thicker than necessary and contained spaces that could hide weapons or provide escape routes. Teho had helped build some of these structures himself during his first year on New Terra. Back then he thought he was just being a helpful neighbor who knew something about construction. Now he realized his military training had unconsciously guided him to create defensive positions without even thinking about it. The third Vorthan to die was Corporal Bex, the commander's own nephew. The young alien had been inspecting the human houses for hidden weapons when he entered the wrong basement at the wrong time. Teho was waiting in the shadows with a monofilament wire that could cut through alien scales. Like tissue paper, Corporal Bex died quickly and quietly, but this time Teho left the body where it would be found. He wanted the remaining aliens to start feeling afraid. He wanted them to understand that they were being hunted by something they could not see or catch. The psychological effect was just as important as reducing their numbers. When the searchers found the corporal, his body had been positioned to send a clear message. The alien lay on his back with his energy weapon placed across his chest like a ceremonial offering. His helmet had been removed and set carefully beside his head. The arrangement was respectful but terrifying in its precision. Commander Bex finally began to understand that his force was facing an enemy unlike any they had encountered before. This was not random violence from angry farmers. This was systematic elimination by someone with advanced military training. Every attack showed knowledge of Vorthan anatomy and tactical doctrine. The alien commander gathered his remaining 27 soldiers in the community center and ordered them to stay together in groups of at least 5. He posted guards at every entrance and window and established overlapping fields of fire that should make it impossible for anyone to approach undetected. But the Vorthans had made a critical error by clustering together in one building. They thought the thick walls and multiple guards would protect them, but they had actually made themselves easier targets for someone trained in close-quarters combat. The community center that felt like a fortress to them was really a trap waiting to be sprung. Teho spent the rest of the day studying the aliens' new defensive positions from his hidden observation posts. He counted weapons and ammunition supplies. He noted which soldiers seemed nervous and which ones appeared confident. He identified the sentries who were most alert and the ones whose attention wandered during long watches. As evening approached, he began placing small explosive charges in carefully selected locations around the building. The charges were designed to create confusion rather than cause massive destruction. He wanted to disorient the aliens and force them to react without thinking clearly. The night air carried the sound of alien voices arguing inside the community center. Some of the Vorthan soldiers wanted to call for reinforcements from their ships in orbit. Others insisted that retreat was the only sensible option. Commander Bex refused to consider either choice because admitting that humans could threaten his warriors would destroy his reputation. Shortly after midnight, Teho activated the first set of charges. The explosions were small but strategically placed to cut power lines and damage communication equipment the building plunged into. Darkness and the aliens found themselves unable to contact their orbital support or call for help. Panic spread through the Vorthan ranks as they realized they were trapped with an invisible enemy who could strike anywhere. At any time, some of them fired their weapons at shadows, while others huddled together in corners hoping that staying still would keep them safe. Neither strategy would work against a warrior like Shadow 7. The psychological warfare was working exactly as Tejo had planned. The aliens were frightened, confused, and making mistakes that would cost them their lives. Fear was a weapon just as deadly as any knife or rifle when used properly against an enemy who had never faced a truly dangerous opponent. As the terrified Vorthans waited in the dark building, they had no idea that their hunter was already inside with them, moving through ventilation shafts and maintenance tunnels. Tejo had penetrated their supposedly secure perimeter while they were distracted by the explosions outside. The real killing was about to begin, and Commander Bex was finally going to learn why humans were not the weak prey species he had believed them to be. The night was still young, and Shadow 7 had work to do before sunrise came to Harmony Village. The morning sun painted the hills of New Terra in soft golden light. Kim Tejo stood in his small garden behind the white wooden house he shared with his son. The tomatoes were growing well this season, and the corn stalks reached almost to his shoulders. He wiped sweat from his face with the back of his hand and smiled as he heard his 8-year-old boy, Wu Jin, laughing somewhere in the house. Life on New Terra was simple, and that was exactly what Tejo wanted 5 years ago when Earth joined the Galactic Federation. Humans were allowed to settle on empty worlds like this one. Most people who came here were tired of the crowded cities and endless noise of Earth. They wanted peace and quiet. They wanted to grow their own food and raise their children away from the pollution and crime. Harmony Village sat in a green valley between rolling hills. Only 300 people lived here. Most of them were farmers like old Li Dongsu, who grew the best vegetables anyone had ever tasted. There was also Park Minho, who ran the general store and fixed broken equipment when it stopped working. Teacher Kim So-young taught the village children in the small schoolhouse that doubled as a community center on weekends. Everyone knew everyone else in Harmony Village. The children played together in the streets while their parents worked. People helped each other when times were hard. When farmer Choi Byung-ho broke his leg last spring, the whole village came together to harvest his crops. When the winter storms damaged roofs, everyone grabbed hammers and nails to help fix them. Tejo told people he used to work security back on Earth. He said he got tired of the dangerous job and wanted something peaceful he was good with his hands and could fix almost anything that broke. The neighbors often asked him to help repair their farming equipment or patch holes in their roofs. He always said yes and never asked for payment. He seemed like the perfect neighbor, quiet and helpful and always ready to lend a hand. His son, Wu Jin, was the light of his life. The boy had his mother's eyes bright and full of curiosity about everything around him. She had died when he was very young, and Tahoe had raised him alone on New Terra. Wu Jin loved to explore the hills around the village. He collected interesting rocks and built model spaceships from scrap metal. His father taught him to grow vegetables and how to use tools safely. The other children in the village adored Wu Jin. He was always kind to the younger kids and helped them when they fell down or lost their toys. The adults smiled when they saw him running through the streets with his friends. His laughter could be heard from one end of the village, too. The other grandmother, Yang, who lived next door, often said the boy could brighten even the darkest day with his smile. This peaceful morning started like any other. Tejo was picking ripe tomatoes when he heard the sound of engines overhead. At first he thought it might be a supply ship from Earth. They came every few months bringing tools and medicine and news from home. But these engines sounded different, deeper, and more powerful. He looked up and felt his stomach drop. 3 massive ships blocked out the sun as they descended toward the village. They were not human ships. These vessels looked like giant metal insects with angular wings and weapons mounted on their sides. They landed in the village square with enough force to crack the pavement and shake every building in Harmony Village. Soldiers poured out of the ships, but they were not human soldiers. These creatures stood 7 feet tall with thick scales covering their bodies like armor. Their heads looked like those of Giant lizards with yellow eyes that never blinked and mouths full of sharp teeth, they carried energy weapons that hummed with dangerous power. The leader of these alien soldiers was bigger than the rest, with darker scales and more elaborate armor. Covering his chest, a translator device on his belt turned his hissing voice into words the humans could understand. He announced that he was Commander Bex of the Vorthan Empire, and that humans on New Terra were guilty of stealing Vorthan technology. The villagers gathered in the square looking confused and frightened. Nobody in Harmony Village had ever seen any alien technology, let alone stolen it. They were simple farmers and shopkeepers who just wanted to live in peace. Old Li Dongsu stepped forward with his hands raised. He tried to explain that there must be some mistake, that the people here had never even met a Vorthan before today. Commander Bex listened to the old man's words with growing impatience. His yellow eyes narrowed as he studied the frightened humans around him. These creatures looked so weak and soft compared to the warrior races the Vorthans usually fought. How dare they try to lie to him about their crimes? He gestured to his soldiers and gave them orders in their own language, the Vorthan. Soldiers began searching houses and demanding that people open their storage areas. They pushed villagers aside roughly and knocked over furniture, while looking for evidence of stolen technology. When they found nothing, they grew more aggressive. Some of them seemed disappointed that they had not found a reason to use their weapons. Teacher Kim So-young tried to keep the children calm. She gathered them near the schoolhouse and told them to stay quiet and still. But the alien soldiers frightened the little ones, and some began to cry. The sound of children sobbing seemed to anger the Vorthans even more, as if the noise itself was an insult to their authority. When old Li Dongsu saw a soldier threatening his 6-year-old granddaughter, he could not stay quiet anymore. The old farmer stepped between the alien and the child. His voice shook, but he stood his ground. He told the soldier to leave the little girl alone, that she had done nothing wrong and was just scared. The Vorthan soldier looked down at the frail old human who dared to challenge him. Without warning, he raised his energy weapon and fired. The beam struck Li Dongsu in the chest, and the old man crumpled to the ground. His granddaughter screamed and ran to him, but he did not move again. That was when young Wu Jin made the decision that would change everything. The brave boy had been watching from near the general store when he saw the kind old farmer who always gave him extra candy fall to the ground. Something inside him snapped. He picked up a rock from the street and threw it as hard as he could at the soldier who had hurt his friend. The rock bounced harmlessly off the alien's thick scales, but the action drew every Vorthan's attention to the small human boy, the soldier who had killed. Li Dongsu turned his weapon toward Wu Jin. His yellow eyes showed no mercy as he took aim at the child. Several villagers screamed and tried to run toward the boy, but they were too far away. Toho had been working in his garden when he heard the first sounds of trouble from the village. He dropped his tools and ran toward the noise. But the streets were confusing, with alien ships blocking his usual path. By the time he reached the square, the worst had already happened. His son lay still on the dusty ground, surrounded by crying neighbors. The father fell to his knees beside the small body. His hands trembled as he touched his son's face, checking for any sign of life, but finding none. For a long moment he knelt there in silence. While chaos continued around him, the other villagers watched him with growing concern, because something was changing in his expression. When Taeho finally stood up, he moved differently than before. Gone was the gentle farmer who helped fix broken equipment. In his place was someone else entirely, someone who made the air feel dangerous even though he had not said a word. The Vorthan soldiers noticed the change too, and several of them took a step backward without understanding. With a man who had just lost everything that mattered to him looked around the square at the alien soldiers who had destroyed his peaceful life. His face had become a mask of stone, but his eyes burned with something cold and terrible. None of the villagers had ever seen their quiet neighbor look like this before, and it frightened them almost as much as the armed aliens did. Commander Bex ordered his soldiers to continue their search, but he kept glancing at the human who knelt beside the dead child. Something about that man's stillness worried him, even though he could not say why. After all, what could one grieving farmer do against 30 trained Vorthan warriors armed with advanced weapons? As the day wore on and the aliens took over the village, Taeho carried his son's body home. The neighbors watched him go and whispered among themselves about how different he seemed. The gentle man they thought they knew had vanished and been replaced by someone who moved like a predator studying its prey that night as the Vorthan soldiers celebrated their easy conquest of the week. Human colony, none of them noticed the dark figure watching them from the shadows. None of them realized that they had made a terrible mistake when they killed that small boy. None of them understood that the quiet farmer was about to become their worst nightmare. Dawn came to Harmony Village with the discovery of 4 more dead Vorthan soldiers inside the community center commander. Bex stared at the bodies of his warriors and felt something he had never experienced before in his military career. True fear was creeping up his spine like ice water as he realized he was facing an enemy beyond his understanding. The dead aliens had been killed with clinical precision during the night while their comrades slept fitfully just meters away. Each death showed the work of someone who understood Vorthan physiology perfectly. Knife wounds were placed exactly where they would cause instant death without allowing the victim to cry out for help. Disturbed the Bex even more was the way the bodies had been arranged. They were positioned respectfully with their weapons placed beside them and their eyes closed as if they had died in honorable combat. This was not the work of a savage human seeking revenge. This was something far more dangerous, a professional warrior who killed without emotion or hatred. The remaining 23 Vorthans were exhausted and demoralized. 3 days of constant fear had worn down their mental defenses. Several of the younger soldiers suggested abandoning the mission and returning to their ships in orbit, but Bex knew that retreat would mean the end of his military career and possibly his life. Desperate to regain control of the situation, the Vorthan commander made a decision that would seal his fate. He ordered his soldiers to round up the surviving human villagers and bring them to the town square as hostages. If the invisible killer wanted to continue his war, then innocent people would pay the price for his actions. 26 villagers were forced at gunpoint to kneel in the dusty square where young Wujin had died 3 days earlier. Among them were elderly couples who had lived in Harmony Village since its founding, children who had played with Tehozia, son teachers and shopkeepers who had never hurt anyone in their lives. Commander Bex activated a portable amplifier and announced his ultimatum in a voice that carried across the entire village. For every dead Vorthan soldier, he would execute 5 human hostages. The killing would continue until the coward responsible for attacking his troops surrendered himself and faced justice. Alien Commander believed this threat would force the mysterious enemy to reveal himself. No warrior could watch innocent people die for his actions. Bex had studied human psychology during his military training, and he thought he understood how their emotional weaknesses could be exploited, but the Vorthan had made a fatal error in his understanding of what kind of human he was dealing with. Shadow 7 had spent 20 years making impossible choices in situations where there were no good options. He had learned to compartmentalize his emotions and focus on mission objectives even when the cost was terrible. As the sun set on the 4th day, Teho made his decision. It was time to stop hiding in the shadows and face his enemies directly. He would give the aliens one chance to leave his world peacefully. If they refused, then he would show them what a real warrior looked like. When all restraints were removed, the former Navy SEAL emerged from the darkness at exactly 9 o'clock wearing his full combat gear. The black tactical armor made him look like death itself walking through the village streets. His face was painted with camouflage, but his eyes burned with cold fire that made even the bravest Vorthan soldiers take a step backward. In his hands he carried weapons that the colonists had never seen before, an assault rifle designed specifically for fighting armored aliens, a pistol that fired rounds capable of penetrating Vorthan battle armor grenades that could destroy an entire squad with a single explosion. The gear of a man who had fought in wars across the Galactic stopped in the center of the square, 20 meters from where Commander Beck stood with his hostages. When he spoke, his voice was calm and steady, but it carried the authority of someone who had commanded respect on a dozen battlefields. His words were broadcast through the alien's own amplification system. He told them exactly who he was and what he had done during his military career. Shadow 7 had been responsible for ending 3 separate wars ahead of schedule. His teams had eliminated over 200 high-value targets during classified operations that shifted the balance of power across human space. The Proxima campaign had seen him infiltrate enemy headquarters and assassinate their supreme commander while surrounded by 1,000 enemy soldiers. During the Kepler Rebellion, he had single-handedly destroyed their main weapons factory by setting charges that looked like industrial accidents. His reputation among Earth's enemies was legendary. He listed the battles he had fought and the decorations he had earned: the Silver Star for extraordinary heroism during the siege of Alpha Centauri, the Distinguished Service Cross for leading a rescue mission behind enemy lines on Vega Prime 3, Purple Hearts for wounds received in combat against alien forces. Then Tejo explained exactly what the Vorthons had done wrong by killing his son. They had murdered an innocent child who represented everything good and pure in the universe. They had destroyed the one thing that gave his life meaning and purpose. They had awakened something that should have remained sleeping forever. The offer he made was simple and reasonable. The Vorthons could leave New Terra immediately and return to their empire with their lives. He would allow them to depart unharmed if they were gone within 6 hours. In exchange, he would stop hunting them and let them go back to their families. It was more mercy than they deserved after what they had done to his boy, but Tahoe was still enough of a civilized man to give them one final chance to choose life over death. The code of honor that had guided him through his military career demanded that he offer terms. Before beginning Total War, Commander Bex listened to the human's words with growing anger. How dare this pathetic farmer threaten the warriors of the Vorthon Empire? Even if the human had military training, he was still just one man against 23 trained soldiers. The odds were impossible, and the alien commander was too proud to show fear. The Vorthon leader made the mistake that would doom every soldier under his command. He laughed at what he saw as a desperate bluff and rejected the offer with contempt. Instead of accepting the chance to live, he threatened to begin executing hostages immediately unless the human surrendered. Bex ordered his soldiers to select the first 5 villagers for execution, starting with the oldest and weakest. He wanted to break the human's resolve by making him watch helpless people die for his defiance. The alien commander was absolutely certain that no warrior could endure such psychological pressure, but he had completely misunderstood the man he was facing. Shadow 7 had been forced to watch teammates die in situations where saving them would have compromised vital missions. He had learned to carry that guilt and pain while still accomplishing his objectives. The death of innocence would not break him. Instead, something else happened in Tejo's eyes. The last traces of mercy and civilization disappeared like candle flames being blown out. What remained was pure lethal intent, focused like a laser beam on the aliens who had taken everything from him. The peaceful farmer was gone forever. When Tejo spoke again, his voice had changed. It was still calm and controlled, but underneath was something that made the hostages shiver with fear, even though his words were not directed at them. He told Commander Bex that the offer was now permanently withdrawn. There would be no mercy for any Vorthon on New Terra. Every single alien soldier would die before the sun rose again. It would not be quick or easy death, but the slow, methodical elimination of every creature that had participated in his son's murder. The hunt would continue until not one invader remained alive. The human warrior turned and walked back into the darkness, leaving the aliens to contemplate what they had just heard. Several Vorthon soldiers suggested that they should accept the delayed offer and try to escape to their ships, but Commander Bex was too proud and too stupid to realize that he had just sealed the fate of his entire command. As midnight approached, the final phase of Shadow 7's war was about to begin. The aliens had chosen death over life, and he was prepared to grant their wish in ways that would make them regret ever coming to his peaceful world. The night would bring horrors that none of the Vorthons were prepared to face, and by morning Harmony Village would be free of invaders forever. News of what happened at Harmony Village spread across the galaxy faster than the speed of light itself. Merchant ships carried the story from one star system to another, while diplomatic channels buzzed with urgent communications between alien governments. The basic facts remained the same. No matter who told the tale, a single human had destroyed an entire Vorthon military unit after they killed his child. The first reports were dismissed as impossible exaggerations. Military analysts from a dozen different species calculated that one individual could not defeat 30 trained soldiers, no matter how skilled or motivated they might be. But as more details emerged and witness statements were verified, the truth became undeniable. Captain Yex of the merchant vessel Star Wanderer was the first to broadcast the story beyond New Terra. His ship had arrived at the colony 3 days after the massacre to deliver supplies and found a village full of humans who spoke in whispers about their neighbor who had become a one-man army. The surviving villagers told consistent stories about Kim Taeho, the quiet farmer who had revealed himself to be something far more dangerous. They described how he had systematically hunted the alien invaders through the night using skills and equipment that belonged in military arsenals, not farming communities. When Captain Yex interviewed the human survivors, he expected to find people celebrating their liberation from occupation. Instead, he found a community that was grateful, but also deeply shaken by what they had witnessed. Their rescuer had saved their lives, but he had also shown them a side of humanity they had never imagined existed. The Galactic Federation dispatched an investigation team within 48 hours of receiving the initial reports. They expected to find evidence of human military involvement or advanced weapons technology that could explain how one colonist had achieved such impossible results. What they discovered was far more disturbing. The investigators found that Kim Taeho had acted completely alone, using only standard military equipment that any retired soldier might legally possess. There was no indication of outside support or secret government backing. The man had planned and executed the entire operation using nothing but his own skills and determination. More troubling was the discovery of Tahose's true identity in the Earth military databases. Shadow 7 was not just any retired special forces operator. He was a legend among the human military elite with a service record that read like something from a science fiction novel. His achievements seemed impossible even by human standards. The Proxima War files revealed that Taeho had single-handedly infiltrated the enemy command structure and eliminated their supreme leader while surrounded by 1,000 hostile soldiers. During the Kepler Rebellion, he had destroyed 3 major weapons facilities using improvised explosives and guerrilla tactics that became required study material in military academies. When the full scope of his classified missions was revealed, alien military leaders across the galaxy began to recalculate their assessments of human capabilities. If one supposedly peaceful farmer could possess such devastating skills, then how many other retired warriors were living quietly on frontier colonies? The Vorthan Empire initially demanded justice for their dead soldiers and threatened military action against Earth unless the killer was surrendered for trial. But their attitude changed dramatically when human officials released selected portions of Shadow 7's service record. The aliens quickly withdrew their demands and offered condolences for the loss of the human child. Other alien governments that had been considering military action against human colonies suddenly found reasons to postpone their plans. The knowledge that seemingly harmless human farmers might actually be sleeping predators with advanced combat training was enough to make even the most aggressive species reconsider their intentions. Earth Command received emergency authorization to activate sleeper agents on 12 frontier worlds. Retired special forces operators who had been living as miners, farmers, and shopkeepers received coded messages informing them that their cover identities were now secondary to their primary mission of protecting human civilians. The psychological impact of the Harmony Village incident was even more significant than its immediate tactical effects. Alien military academies began teaching courses about human psychology and the dangerous bonds between human parents and their offspring. Students learned that attacking human children was not just morally wrong but tactically suicidal. Young alien officers studied detailed analyses of how Taeho had used fear as a weapon against trained soldiers. They learned about human concepts like righteous anger and the lengths to which humans would go when seeking justice for their loved ones. The lesson was clear: humans were not the weak prey species many aliens had believed them to be. Trade relationships shifted as alien merchants became more respectful in their dealings with human colonies. Military patrols gave human. What happened in Harmony Village during the next 8 hours would become known throughout the galaxy as the Night of Justice, though the Vorthan Empire preferred to call it the Massacre of New Terra. The truth was somewhere between those two names. But what mattered was that a single human warrior had declared war on an entire alien military unit and was about to win. Commander Bex had made the fatal mistake of rejecting mercy from someone who was perfectly capable of providing it. Now he would discover what happened when a retired Navy SEAL decided that diplomacy was no longer an option. The aliens had chosen violence, and Tejo was prepared to give them more violence than they could possibly handle. The attack began at exactly midnight when the first set of explosions rocked the community center. The charges Tejo had placed earlier were designed to create maximum confusion while minimizing damage to the human hostages. The blasts cut power lines, shattered windows, and filled the building with smoke and debris. In the chaos that followed, the Vorthons lost track of their prisoners. Several villagers managed to escape in the darkness, while the aliens stumbled around trying to understand what was happening. The remaining hostages huddled together in terror as energy weapons fired wildly at shadows that might or might not be real. Tejo moved through the building like a ghost that had learned the art of war. His night vision equipment allowed him to see clearly. While the aliens were effectively blind, the thermal imaging showed him exactly where each enemy was located, even through walls and smoke. His tactical computer tracked every target and calculated the most efficient killing sequence. The first alien died when a monomolecular wire removed his head so quickly that his body remained standing for several seconds before collapsing. The wire was nearly invisible and made no sound as it cut through scales, armor, and bone with equal ease. The dead soldier never knew what killed him. Private Vorth was searching for human prisoners when he stepped into a corridor that Tejo had prepared as a killing zone. Motion sensors triggered shaped charges that sent steel fragments flying at precisely calculated angles. The alien was shredded by dozens of metal shards before he could even scream. Sergeant Kex died from a knife thrust that penetrated between the plates of his body armor. The blade found the one vulnerable spot where his neck joined his torso, severing his spine and vocal cords simultaneously. He dropped his weapon and fell face first into a pool of his own blood while his legs twitched uselessly. The psychological effect of these deaths was just as important as their tactical value. The surviving Vorthons could hear their comrades dying, but they could not see their killer or understand how he was moving through the building. Undetected panic spread through their ranks like a plague that destroyed their ability to think clearly. Commander Bex tried to maintain order by shouting commands, but his voice cracked with fear that he could no longer hide. Several of his soldiers had broken down completely and were firing their weapons at anything that moved, including their own teammates. The discipline that held military units together was crumbling under pressure they had never experienced before. Tejo used every weapon in his arsenal with deadly precision. The combat shotgun, loaded with armor-piercing rounds, could punch through Vorthon battle plates at close range. The sniper rifle allowed him to eliminate targets from across the building without revealing his position. Grenades cleared entire rooms of enemies when stealth was no longer necessary, but his most effective weapon was fear itself. The aliens had never faced an enemy who could appear anywhere at any time without warning. They were used to fighting other military units with predictable tactics and visible formations. Fighting a single opponent who used the environment itself as a weapon was beyond their training. By 3 in the morning, half the Vorthon force had been eliminated. The survivors had barricaded themselves in the main hall of the community center, but their defensive position was rapidly becoming a trap. Tejo controlled every entrance and exit, which meant they could not escape or call for reinforcements. The aliens tried to contact their orbital ships, but Tejo had destroyed their communication equipment. Hours earlier, they were completely cut off from outside help and facing an enemy who seemed to know their every move before they made it. Some of the younger soldiers begged Commander Bex to surrender while they still could, but the Vorthon commander was too proud to admit defeat at the hands of a single human. He ordered his remaining troops to fight to the death rather than face the shame of losing to what he still believed was an inferior species. His pride would cost every soldier under his commander. Tejo began the final assault at 4:30 in the morning, using techniques he had perfected during urban combat operations on hostile worlds. Smoke grenades filled the main hall with thick clouds that blocked visibility, while his thermal imaging allowed him to see every target clearly. The first breach came through the ceiling where Tejo had cut a hole using plasma charges that melted through the structural supports. He dropped into the room like an avenging angel wearing black armor and carrying death in both hands. The aliens fired wildly in his direction, but he was already moving to his next position. Corporal Zeth took 3 rounds from the assault rifle before his nervous system registered the impacts. The armor-piercing bullets tore through his chest plate and destroyed vital organs while he was still trying to figure out where the shots had come from. He died wondering how a human had learned to fight so effectively. Lieutenant Krov lasted longer than most of his comrades because he was smart enough to find good cover behind an overturned table. But Tejo had anticipated this and placed explosive charges under the floor directly beneath that position. The blast launched the alien into the air, where he made an easy target for the sniper rifle. The battle raged for over an hour as Tejo systematically eliminated every Vorthan in the building. He used mobility and superior tactics to avoid their return fire while picking them off one by one. Each death was quick and efficient, the work of a professional who took no pleasure in killing but would not hesitate when duty demanded it. Commander Bex was the last alien left alive in a room filled with the bodies of his soldiers. He had watched his entire command destroyed by a single human warrior who fought with skills that seemed impossible. The proud Vorthan officer finally understood that he had made a terrible mistake when he underestimated the creatures he thought were weak. When Tejo emerged from the smoke with his rifle trained on the alien commander's chest, Bex tried one final act of defiance. He raised his energy weapon and attempted to fire, but discovered that his hands were shaking too badly to aim properly. The shot went wide and burned a hole in the wall behind the human. The former Navy Sil looked down at the alien who had ordered his son's death and felt nothing at all. The rage that had driven him through the long night had burned itself out, leaving only cold professional satisfaction at a mission completed successfully. Commander Bex had thought humans were soft, but he was about to learn the truth. The single shot from Tejo's rifle ended the Vorthan commander's life instantly. The armor-piercing round destroyed his brain before he could feel any pain. It was a cleaner death than he deserved. But the human warrior was not interested in torture or revenge, only in justice for his murdered son. As dawn broke over Harmony Village, the community center stood silent except for the sound of Tahosea breathing. The man who had been a gentle farmer just 5 days earlier stood surrounded by the bodies of 30 alien soldiers. Each death had been necessary and justified, but the cost of victory weighed heavily on his soul. The surviving villagers emerged from their hiding places to find their quiet neighbor had become their savior. The gentle man who had grown vegetables and fixed broken equipment had revealed himself as one of the most dangerous humans alive. They looked at him with gratitude mixed with fear, understanding that they had been living beside a sleeping dragon. Tejo walked slowly back to his house, where he carefully cleaned his weapons and stored his equipment in the hidden room beneath the basement. The war was over, but the consequences were just beginning. The galaxy would soon learn what happened when someone made the mistake of killing a human child.